So good evening, everyone. My name is Jordan Abshire. I am the Operations Branch Manager at the Arkansas Division of Emergency Management. My branch is responsible for the readiness of the State Emergency Operations Center through planning, training, and exercises. We are also responsible for any operational planning, logistics, and the Emergency Management Assistance Compact, or EMAC. I am also recognized as the EMAC coordinator for the state of Arkansas, but it is a group effort within the operations branch as well as some other volunteers. So today I'm going to give you a quick overview of the EMAC system. There's going to be a lot of information that I'm going to go through rather quickly. So please let me know at the end if there's anything that I need to expand on, and of course, any questions that you guys may have. All right. So the first thing we need to cover is, what is EMAC? Well, EMAC, or the Emergency Management Assistance Compact, is a state-to-state mutual aid agreement. States can utilize EMAC to share resources such as services, personnel, equipment, and commodities across state lines during times of an emergency or disaster. EMAC has been enacted into law by all 50 states, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, Guam, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and the Northern Mariana Islands. So EMAC came about after Hurricane Andrew hit Florida in 1992, after they realized that they needed a way to share resources across state lines when federal resources were not sufficient. So through the Southern Governors Association, they developed the Southern Regional EMAC as a state-to-state mutual aid agreement. After seeing the benefit of having this agreement already in place, the SGA decided to de-regionalize the compact by removing the Southern Regional and just keeping the EMAC, which opened membership to all states and territories. Then in 1996, EMAC was ratified into public law through the U.S. Congress and adopted into Arkansas law in 1997. Then in 2021, we updated the language in our law to allow for non-state assets like locals and volunteers to deploy as agents of the state. So what can be deployed through EMAC? Since EMAC is a state-to-state agreement, any state resources may be utilized, and other resources like local, private, and volunteers can be cloaked as agents of the state thanks to a specific wording found in the EMAC legislation for the state of Arkansas. As you can see, EMAC can be utilized by many different disciplines and can be expanded as needed to respond to various types of incidents. Recently, we have seen a range of requests from everything from first responders to dispatchers, local emergency managers, and even water wastewater specialists. EMAC can truly be used for almost anything. So what does EMAC do? EMAC maximizes the use of available resources, expedites and streamlines delivery of assistance between member states, provides management and oversight of interstate mutual aid, and protects state sovereignty. It does not replace federal support, alter a state's operational direction and control, endorse or support freelancing or self-deployment, and it does not broker resources from municipality to municipality. So the foundation of EMAC is the law passed in all 55 member states and the implementation procedures that all states have agreed to follow. I'm not going to go into depth of all 13 articles of the law, but I'm going to highlight a few key components. So Article 1 does say that a governor must declare an emergency or disaster before resources can be received through EMAC. However, the compact can be trained and exercised without a declaration. Article 2 states that any resource one state may want to share with another can be deployed under EMAC as long as there are enabling mechanisms that allow non-state resources to be recognized as agents of the state. It also states that the State Emergency Management Agency shall implement the compact on behalf of the governor. Only the authorized representatives, or ARs, of member states can request or offer assistance. We have 3 ARs for Arkansas that are all part of ADAM: the Director, Executive Deputy Director, and the Preparedness and Response Deputy Director. Article 3 identifies the state responsibilities to implement EMAC, including the development of plans, procedures, educations, training, and more. Article 4 states that a state may withhold resources if they are needed at home. Article 4 also says that personnel deploying through the compact, with the exception of law enforcement who must be sworn in to have the powers of arrest in the requesting state, have the same powers, duties, rights, and authorities as they do at home. While on an EMAC deployment, personnel are under the command and control of their home state leadership, but under the operational control of the requesting state. Article 5 identifies all state-issued licenses, certificates, and permits are deemed licensed, certified, and permitted by the requesting state. So your certifications and licensures will transfer across state lines when deployed under EMAC. So if you're a paramedic or a doctor in Arkansas, then you would have the same recognition in another member state. Article 6 states that for tort liability and immunity purposes, you are an agent of the requesting state so long as you are acting in good faith. Article 8 identifies the assisting state as the responsible party for providing workers' compensation and death benefits. As a note, the law also states workers' compensation and death benefit claims cannot be billed back to the requesting state. Essentially, any injuries or fatalities that occur during an EMAC deployment will be treated as if that injury or fatality occurred during their normal response at home. Article 9 simply states that mission-related expenses will be reimbursed by the requesting state, including damage to equipment. EMAC reimbursement is not contingent on a federal disaster declaration, and of course, all expenses must be eligible and documented. So that is a very quick and brief overview of some of the articles, and you can access and read the entire EMAC legislation from the EMAC website under the Learn About EMAC link. Now we will look at the EMAC process. As I said earlier, all of the EMAC members have agreed on a standardized implementation of EMAC through a 5-phase process. The first phase is pre-event preparation. This is where you do everything you need to prepare for an EMAC deployment. On the state level, this includes developing plans and procedures and conducting training and exercises. On the local level, it includes working with the state to understand the EMAC process. And for first responders, it includes taking an EMAC training course and developing mission-ready packages. So what is a mission-ready package? Well, NEMA developed the mission-ready package concept as part of the lessons learned after Hurricane Katrina. It was a simple idea. Put everything you need in a single package so when the resource rolls out the door, you have everything you need to conduct that mission in the requesting state and you know what it's going to cost. Mission-ready packages were designed to be built around NIMS resource typing, but if your resource does not meet the NIMS standard, you can still create a mission-ready package. We have shown that resource providers who have mission-ready packages significantly reduce the time from request to deployment because all the data collected as part of the mission-ready package is what is needed to make an offer of assistance to the EMAC request. Here's an example of what goes into a mission-ready package. It identifies the equipment, personnel, commodities, meals, travel, and lodging, licenses that need to transfer, limitations to the mission, equipment requirements, and more. You can also include things like service schedules for equipment, mobilization and demobilization activities, and footprint requirements. Having this information identified during the pre-event phase will help deploy resources faster when it matters. As I mentioned earlier, in order for a state to receive resources through EMAC, a governor has to declare an emergency or disaster. EMAC follows the normal emergency management process where all events start and end locally. Once local resources become exhausted, then the request escalates to the next level up to the state. The state determines how the resource request will be filled, including any EMAC request. It is important to note that EMAC requests can sometimes take a while to fill and should be identified early in the incident to allow for resources to be identified. As an assisting state, all offers of assistance go through the State Emergency Management Agency, or in Arkansas, it would be ADAM. So the request and offer phase is done through an online EMAC operating system. We also complete the EMAC mission paperwork that constitutes a legally binding agreement between the two states for that mission. This document is called a Resource Support Agreement, or RSA, and is signed by both states' authorized representatives. Resources that deploy through EMAC are given an EMAC mission order authorization form during the mobilization stage, and they receive a pre-deployment briefing to ensure they know where they are going, what they will be doing, and who to contact should they need help. This form also shows the cost estimates that were identified as part of the resource support agreement. Because this is a legally binding agreement, any changes to cost, mission, or anything else must be sent to the assisting state to look at amending the RSA and ensure that any cost incurred will be reimbursable. For example, let us assume that in your offer you did not include lodging expenses because you were planning on staying at a responder support camp, but you realized that you needed to stay a night or more en route to the camp. These additional costs need to be brought to the attention of the EMAC coordinator immediately so that the RSA can be amended to make sure that the cost can be reimbursed. Another thing to consider is that when you deploy under EMAC, you are stating that you have everything you need to successfully fulfill the mission you are deploying for. If you realize that you forgot a sleeping bag or a chainsaw or something else to be able to complete your mission, those costs are not reimbursable if they stay with you. They are only reimbursable if left in the state you are assisting. So make sure that any purchases made are eligible for reimbursement. And you can always contact your EMAC point of contact if you're not sure. Once deployed, the resource providers are under the operational control of the requesting state until they demobilize and return home. As we've mentioned earlier, there has to be enabling mechanisms to deploy non-state resources through EMAC. In Arkansas, our EMAC legislation has language that recognizes non-state resources as agents of the state. Non-state resources can be deployed under EMAC, but all expenses of the mission are the initial responsibility of their home agency, meaning that your agency would need to be able to sustain the cost until reimbursement can be made. The reimbursement timeline will depend on how long it takes to get a completed reimbursement packet from the resource provider, which is why it is important to have an understanding of the documentation needs on the front end. If a local would like to respond to a disaster in another state, they should coordinate with ADAM or on any potential EMAC request. It is also important to note that those who self-deploy will not be eligible for reimbursement under EMAC. So if you're contacted to respond to another state for an event, encourage that requester to work through their state EMA and through the EMAC process. So who goes and why? From a state perspective, we receive the request for assistance and we will work through our emergency support functions, or ESFs, which are state agencies that are lead over a specific area, like Penny Rebo is lead for ESF2 communications. If the ESF is unable to identify a resource, we will then look to see if we have any MRPs that would be capable of filling the mission and contact that jurisdiction to discuss the details of the mission. The quickest way to be considered is to have a mission-ready package or to have a relationship with your EMAC coordinator in your state that knows your capabilities. For your local organization or agency, they will identify who would be able to fill the request on a short notice while ensuring they can maintain normal operations during the length of deployment. Since all disasters are not the same, be prepared that there could be changes in your deployment at any time, and there might be occasions where it is identified that your resource is no longer needed and you are turned around en route. We try to avoid this as much as possible, but it can sometimes take time to get a true understanding of the situation, and needs constantly change. Again, you are under the operational control of the requesting state and should try to incorporate into their operations to the best of your ability. When you are contacted about a potential EMAC deployment, it will be the responsibility of the resource provider to ensure that all of their training, certifications, and licensures are up to date, as well as any equipment and supplies needed for the mission are ready to go. For example, a lot of times you will be deploying to a heavily impacted area and may be requested to be self-sufficient for part or all of your deployment. You will need to make sure that you have everything you need to meet this prior to deploying, like MREs, water, cots, blankets, etc. Working with your local emergency manager and your EMAC point of contact will allow you to have a true knowledge of the capabilities and interest in deploying. This is also true by having a mission-ready package on file. It is recommended that you have basic emergency management trainings like ICS 300 and 400 and complete the Professional Development Series, which are 7 independent study courses through FEMA. Lastly, you want to be prepared and respond quickly by monitoring national events and incidents. But remember, even though a state may have significant impacts, they may not make any EMAC requests or will be working through specific states. We will only respond for active EMAC requests in the EMAC operating system. So what's expected of you when you deploy through EMAC? It is important to maintain a positive attitude and not let frustrations build up. If there's anything significant that is causing issues in your deployment, notify your EMAC point of contact so they may be able to work through the state EMAs to resolve the issues, or if necessary, recall you back home. You will want to keep an open mind and be willing to work with others. It is also important that you remain in contact with your supervisor and your EMAC point of contact when deployed. This will allow us to know if there's any issues and make sure that everyone is safe. While it may be difficult during the response, it's also important to make sure that you stay within your scope of work. If there needs to be a change, you will need to work with your EMAC point of contact to amend the RSA to allow for those expenses to be reimbursable. Do not assume that the change will be approved. If it's not approved and your mission is no longer needed, you will then be asked to demobilize. I cannot emphasize this enough, but you will need to remain patient and be aware that things will almost always move slowly. As mentioned before, these states are going to be overwhelmed and things will be chaotic. We have seen in the past confusion at staging areas, limited mission work, lack of information sharing, and early demobilization with no actual response work. I know as a responder, you are wanting to immediately be boots on the ground and helping those that need it, but not working through the state's existing process is just going to create even more confusion. So again, be patient and be flexible. Remember, we are here to be your point of contact at the state level and try to resolve any issues that you may be having. It's also important that you contact us for any added expenses like damages to equipment, additional purchases that need to be made, and anything else that is not identified in your mission order authorization. Lastly, safety is your top priority. So when you deploy under EMAC, you are typically deploying for a couple of weeks or longer with long shifts of 12 hours or more. You are deploying to a disaster-impacted area and conditions could be very primitive, and you will need to be self-sufficient in a majority of cases until a responder support camp can be established or local infrastructure restored. Your mission could change whether it be the work conducted or the timeline of your deployment. Again, all changes will need to be worked through your EMAC point of contact. Typically, the request will make a note of the amount of time you will need to be self-supportive, but take extra essentials just in case. And it is especially important that you document everything for reimbursement purposes. The easiest way to do this is to use an ICS 214 form or something else to document all your movements. This is a few additional tips that will lead to a successful EMAC mission. It's important that you understand your scope of work and that the mission is a contract agreed upon between the requesting and assisting states. Any work conducted outside of that scope will become ineligible for reimbursement. But we do understand that things change during times of disaster, and there may be a need to conduct a different mission. If this occurs, we will work with the state EMAs to adjust the RSA accordingly so that those costs will be reimbursable. It's also important as resource providers that you identify a record keeper as part of your team and to ensure all documentation is being kept and tracked for reimbursement purposes. You also want to make sure that you are keeping any and all receipts and logs related to the mission. You should also have a clear understanding of costs that are ineligible, like alcohol and toiletries, as well as any costs that exceed or are not captured in your mission order authorization. Upon returning home, deployed personnel will need to gather all of their receipts, travel logs, equipment logs, and other documentation and submit it to their home agency, who will compile the reimbursement package and submit it to the home state. The individual will need to be reimbursed by their agency for any expenses they personally incurred. The completed reimbursement packet will then be turned into ADAM for review and processing. ADAM will submit the packet to the requesting state for payment. It is also important to note that a provider must keep all EMAC documentation for a minimum of 3 years for any EMAC reimbursement receipt. So we've gone through the key processes of EMAC, but I'd like to talk about some key takeaways from today's presentation. The biggest takeaway I can stress is the need to work with your state emergency management agency on how you can be involved with the state response efforts and potential EMAC deployments. Each state is different on if they are able to deploy volunteers through EMAC and what enabling mechanisms they have in place. EMAC is also used for interstate mutual aid within its member states and cannot be utilized to manage intrastate mutual aid between municipalities. If you are selected to deploy through EMAC, make sure you understand your mission and what the requirements are, like if you need to be self-sufficient or have certain pieces of equipment. You also need to understand what expenses would be eligible for reimbursement and what the reimbursement processes look like. It is important to note that those who self-deploy will not be eligible for reimbursement under EMAC. So if you are contacted to respond to an event in a different state, encourage that requester to work through ADAM or their state EMA and through the EMAC process. All right, I know that was a lot of information, so I'm going to just open it up for questions, or if I need to expand on anything, just let me know. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
If your team is turned around en route, are you still reimbursed for what your expenses that you've incurred thus far?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. So if you have an official EMAC mission and you have already started the mobilization process of deploying down, and for whatever reason they decide they no longer need it, any expenses that you've incurred so far to that point is reimbursed.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
You want to go ahead and understand?
Yeah. Yeah. Do you hear me okay? Okay. Sorry I was late, folks. Thanks to those that took over for me. Gene, you've got your hand up. Go ahead. Let me remind everybody, if you have a webcam, please turn it on when you come on.
Oh, yes. Good evening, everybody. Gene in Killeen, Texas. What is the credentialing for these people who wish to be part of EMAC? Basically, background checks. Do they have to show proof of license? For instance, I'm a ham radio operator. Do I have to show proof that I'm a ham radio operator? I mean, basically, what is the credentialing process to get somebody to be part of a deployment team?
Yeah, so it's just whatever your resource capability is. So in that point for the ham radio, you would have to show that credentialing to your state EMA or your emergency management agency and that EMAC point of contact. And that information will be put into that mission ready package or that offer of assistance, just to show that that's been verified. But it would just be whatever credentialing or licensures that you have to show that you meet that requirement.
All right. Do members receive some type of separate official like identification or uniform to conduct the deployment mission?
So each state is a little different. So I can't speak for all of them, but for like Arkansas, when we bring in a EMAC resource, we try to, if it's a large enough event that we're bringing in quite a few people, we set up what we call an EMAC personnel accountability processing package. And what that is kind of a check-in, check-out station where we will bring all the personnel through, verify that they are supposed to be in state, confirm where they're going, and we do give them additional badging and credentialing to get them into the disaster impacted area. Now, the good thing is with that mission order authorization form that I talked about earlier, that is going to essentially be your pass to get into whatever disaster area you're going into. That would show that you are supposed to be there.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Not a problem.
Okay. Thank you, Gene. Go ahead, Marty.
Thank you. Jordan, thank you very much for this great presentation. Very well organized and concise. Two questions. First, are all 50 states and our territories participating in EMAC? And second, if a particular state needs outside assistance, do they pick which states they ask, or is there some sort of third-party clearinghouse?
Okay. Yeah. So all 50 states and we have 5 U.S. territories that are considered member states. So there are 55 member states that are part of EMAC. So all of them can ask and offer assistance. So how it works is there's the online system that a state will go through and make a request. Now, we do try to encourage that a state works first with their surrounding states to try to fill the need. And then if they can't get it filled within those states, then they kind of push out to a nationwide or to all the member states process. Depending on what the type of resource is, some states will broadcast it to all member states so anyone can get it. We actually did have just a couple of months ago from Louisiana. Very briefly, there was a communications request that was out there for, I believe, a ComL person. And we just, I think they withdrew it before we had a chance to process it, but they just pushed that out nationwide because I don't think that that's a common resource that they had in the surrounding areas.
Okay, thank you. And one follow-up. I know our Los Angeles Fire Department, our particularly urban search and rescue and swiftwater rescue and so on, they have been deployed numerous times to other states. Is that generally under EMAC, or would this also same kind of cross-line deployment be taking place through some sort of federal resource?
So typically that would be EMAC. Now with the fire departments, if it's for wildfire response, I do know that the U.S. Forestry Department has its own mutual aid system that they utilize. And so a lot of times some will deploy through that and it's not classified under an EMAC deployment. But most movements of resources across state lines are done as EMAC missions.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you, Marty. Okay, Scott, go ahead.
Jordan, thank you very much for being a part of this. So my question is there training, a place we can go to get some more training on the EMAC process, and like for just-in-time training and things like that?
Yes, of course. So NEMA, the National Emergency Management Association, is the administrator of EMAC. So they have a website. It's the EMAC, EMAC web, web.org, that has a bunch of different information. And there are also some online training courses that you can take. There's an overview of what of EMAC, and there is a just-in-time training for deployed resources and some other just general information. And that's actually where you can go and see the EMAC legislation and everything as well.
All right,
And then
go ahead.
And I was going to say, in your state, depending on which state you're from, may have EMAC trainings that they offer as well. So that's how JM thought of having me present on here. Was I conduct webinars for Arkansas to go through the different EMAC processes.
Okay. One last thing, you mentioned credentialing and certification. So as an EMT, if I come to Arkansas under a medical request, so my EMT certification is, I fall under your protocols or my state's protocols?
So you would be under the operational control of Arkansas. So your EMT certification would still follow through. You would not have to go through anything additional to be able to treat patients in Arkansas, but you would follow the coordination control of the state of Arkansas.
Okay, so all of my protocols and skills and stuff would be based through your guys' Emergency Medical Services Authority.
I believe so. I'm not as familiar with like the EMT side of it. In most cases, unless it should follow very similar to your home state, unless there's just something completely drastic that would be different.
Again, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, not a problem.
Yes.
Thank
Jodine, can you lower your desktop? It will help on everybody seeing things here. Close your desktop sharing.
Oh, yes.
Ah, there it goes. Thank you very much. Dan, go ahead.
Well, Jordan, thank you. It was a very excellent presentation. And Scott asked most of the questions I had. I have a comment for Scott later about that. But are you aware of any nationwide overhead cost for the interstate paperwork, basically? Because I mean, there's a whole separate system behind intrastate mutual aid, which is not an issue at all, but interstate. And a question about the medical stuff was, is it kind of like wildland fire where as someone pointed out in the comment, that urban search and rescue, for instance, which does include some medical, is a fee. Does that go through you, or would that go through FEMA's dispatch capabilities?
Okay, so so the first question on the reimbursement, I didn't hit on this very much in my presentation, but the reimbursement process, there are recognized national standards on the type of documentation that is needed for the reimbursement. But how it works is, and I'll just use Arkansas, I'll use JM as an example. So let's say for Arkansas, we get a request for a communications person, and I work with JM, and I'm like, okay, we're going to send you to Oklahoma under an EMAC mission. And we deploy JM to Oklahoma to work, and he does his mission for 2 weeks, and then he comes back to Arkansas. What we have him do is fill out all his paperwork, complete this reimbursement package that includes any expenses that incur that are eligible. So his lodging, his meals, the expense to deploy, the cost of the travel, and anything else that is part of his mission. And we take that reimbursement package and we review it, and it depends on the state. Now, for Arkansas, what we would be able to do is go ahead and reimburse that money back to JM and get him paid, and then we would seek the reimbursement from Oklahoma. But each state would work with each other to get that money reimbursed to those who just deployed or those providers. As far as the type of mission, so yes, there are entities in several states that may be called up under FEMA, like the urban search and rescue or some of the firefighting aspects. In most cases for EMAC, what we're seeing is a shift from trying to pull those as federal. We're working with FEMA to limit them pulling those as federal resources and encouraging it to go through EMAC as a state-to-state mutual aid mission. So those resources can still be deployed out through EMAC if it's a request that comes from another state. And I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, thank you very much. And so it could be an individual resource like a COMEL or a strike team of ambulance, each with a paramedic and EMT.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So like for the COMEL, like the JM example, how that would work for us is because he is a volunteer and works through ESF2 and is a member of ADAM, he would deploy out like a employee of ADAM to another state. As far as like private sector, we've deployed out our like Pafford ambulance here in Arkansas. We've deployed them out under EMAC missions to other states. But each state is different on what capabilities they can deploy out if it's outside of the non-state resources like volunteers. So it just depends on what your state has in place to do that.
Okay, thanks a lot. And again, this was a wonderful presentation. Almost makes me want to go back and finish the professional development series, even though I'm not going to deploy any further than my lower fence. So.
Okay, good deal.
Okay, Bobby, go ahead.
Okay, I think I unmuted myself. In answer to the EMS question about the protocols and what you operate under, the question was generally answered correctly. Arkansas itself, the Arkansas Department of Health, EMS and Trauma Division, puts out and has a standard set of protocols for each level of service, whether it be volunteer, basic EMT services, intermediate services, or full ALS paramedic services. There is a set of standard state protocols, supplies that are required on the vehicles, and such as that to carry inside the state. A lot of depending on where you're deployed, if your EMS task force is connected to or deployed to a certain region of the state or a certain town or whatever, they may give you a set of their local protocols, which every service has their own protocols that they go by that meet at least the state minimum, but they can, through their medical director, have additional capabilities on each level of unit. And so they may give you some of those, get you approved to utilize those through their medical director. And so you're operating under the same guidelines that all the locals are operating under and have those same capabilities. But as a general rule, you would fall under the state standard protocols as a minimum.
Okay. Well, thank you. JM, go ahead and take it.
So, Jordan, I'm wondering if you might talk about that the lead for EMAC rotates among states. I think it used to. Does it still?
Yes, JM, it does. So I didn't get too much into the weeds. So I talked about the National Emergency Management Association as the administrator of EMAC. And then there is an EMAC committee made up of state directors that are the voting membership to determine any changes in the EMAC processes or procedures. And they are advised by a couple of different groups. There's the EMAC advisory group, which is made up of different national organizations. And then there is the EMAC executive task force, which is an EMAC representative from each FEMA region, a lead state representative from each FEMA region, as well as some other members at large. And then that task force has a chair-elect, a chair, and a past chair that leads that task force. I've served as the Region 6 lead state representative twice now. I am actually the chair-elect currently, and in March of 24, I will be the EMAC Executive Task Force Chair, which also means that Arkansas will have the responsibility of the National Coordinating State. Now, what that is the National Coordinating State monitors all events among all member states, and we reach out and assist states that have been impacted with anything that they may need on an immediate level, like getting certain resources or just helping them get set up with their EMAC request processes. So I think that's what you were looking for. Is that right, JM?
Exactly. Now, you said that's going to happen in 2024?
Yes, sir. March of 24.
And so then in April, it's going to be the biggest deal that's ever hit the United States.
I know. You don't remind me.
You two make a good team. Scott, go ahead, Scott.
Bobby, thank you very much for answering my question. And the reason I asked that question is because I'm also part of the federal DMACs. And so when I deploy as a DMAC, I have to follow my protocols to my home state or into the LEMSA that has certified me. And I was just curious how it works under an EMAC process, because I also work for the state of California under the Emergency Medical Services Authority. And we can deploy out under that EMAC contract.
Okay, I would like to remind everybody again, if you have a webcam when you come on to talk, please have your webcam on.
Sorry about that, Dan. My video connection is really poor and I had to cut something off.
I understand. Not a problem. Not a problem. Okay, Gene, you came up. Go ahead.
No, I was just giving a thumbs up on the presentation. That's a great job.
Oh, yes, I agree with you. Barry, how are we doing in chat?
We're doing fine in chat, and I just wanted to make a comment that this procedure does work. It's a lot of paperwork and stuff, but if you're desperate for help in an emergency and your state is aware of it, for example, in the borderline of, in the panhandle of Florida, where borderlines Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia, when they have a hurricane, a lot of times they will go through EMAC to get people because it's shorter to deploy over the border than it is to get people from southern Florida up to the Panhandle. So they use that extensively on the borderline states, and it's a really good system, even though there is a lot of paperwork and a lot of stuff, but it does work.
Welcome to the government.
That's right.
Barry, there was a question in chat early on about whether the EMAC can possibly or should or would extend to neighboring provinces in Canada and or neighboring states in Mexico.
If Jordan can answer that, I'd love to hear it, but I think that it's going to need international treaty to do that.
Yeah,
Okay.
so I can answer that. So there is actually, and I'm not sure of the acronym because, you know, emergency management world, we are full of acronyms, but there is actually something very similar with Canada, with the northern states, the border Canada, that does an international mutual aid agreement. I'm not as familiar with that information on what that looks like, but I do know that that has been established and that several of the bordering states are members of that. And I believe it is a very similar process to EMAC as far as how request and reimbursement and offers go.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Tom, you got your hand up, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I just wanted to make a comment that no matter how low or high you are in the hierarchy of what's going on, you really need to make a sincere effort to comply with the recording and reporting requirements and to get your documents to the right portion of the overhead before you leave, before you demobilize. They need them. They're the people who are supposed to have them. And you've got to take individual responsibility to make sure they get them. And, you know, the comment that I had to correct a guy on, we're just volunteers. I says, yeah, but you're volunteering. If you're actually a volunteer, can save this state thousands of dollars. We've been here 2 weeks, and that will be the state's contribution that the federal government insists on the reimbursement formula. So you can save this state's citizens thousands of dollars just by turning in your blasted paperwork. Please do so. He did cheerfully, but it's real important. Take your individual responsibility, turn in your reports.
All right. Well, thank you for that, Tom. Dan, you got your hand up again.
Yeah, there has to be some mechanism because every year wildland firefighters go to Australia or come from Australia to help us, and Canada, vice versa. So there must be some international agreements with the National Interagency Fire Service federal communities for international responses. I don't know what it is, but what it does is happening every year now.
Looks like I muted myself. I apologize. Thank you for that. Dan, as always, good information. I'm sure that they worked all that in advance. Gene, go ahead.
Yes, maybe my last question, but do the mission ready packages contain basic radio communications equipment? Will it be ham radio, some type of temporary repeater, any type of communications equipment at all?
Yeah, so your mission ready package is going to include anything that you need to successfully complete the mission. So if you have specific equipment or anything like that, that can be included in your package. As far as costs associated with it, it's going to be up to you. You can, if there is a policy or something already in place that kind of has a standardized cost for that equipment as far as a rate. Typically, we refer to FEMA equipment rates when we are looking at cost for the equipment use. But that can be modified if there is something already established. And I do apologize. My camera, for whatever reason, on my computer is not working, or I would log in. But yeah, so anything that package is going to be anything that you need to successfully complete your mission.
All right. Thank you very, very much.
Not a
Yeah,
problem.
thank you. And not a problem. A lot of people have cameras and they just forget to turn them on. Karen, I see you got your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I can't turn on my camera, but about the international agreements, I know that the Los Angeles Fire Department goes to several different countries to help with search and rescue, and the whole CERT program was come about because they went to Mexico and they were helping digging out people for from an earthquake back in 1981, and they saw the need for having a community emergency response team and came back and created it in Los Angeles. But I know that there's an international agreement. I don't know what you call it, but yeah, not only with Canada and Mexico, but several other countries.
I know recently we had to help out Canada a lot. They had some major fires up there, and it took their people and ours both to fight with it there. Okay, Barry, I saw that you at least have a question in there. Or anything else in chat?
No, I'm good. Everything is good in chat. And
What?
it says
What's
the
your question?
International Wildfire Coordination Center is located in Winnipeg, and I guess that's where everything is coordinated from for the Canadians.
Okay. I don't know, but okay. Jordan, Mike.
I'm not sure. I haven't heard of the Wildlife or Wildfire Coordination Center. I did look up. So there are 3 international mutual aid agreements that are all based on the EMAC processes. There's the Pacific Northwest Emergency Management Compact, which is between the states and provinces in the upper Northwest. And then there's the International Emergency Management Group that provides the possibility of mutual aid disasters among participating jurisdictions. And that's also focused more on New England, Canadian areas. And then there is the national EMAC mutual aid agreement that started with the central and prairie regions of the United States and Canada. So it seems like most of our international agreements that are like EMAC are based on the Canadian border and could potentially expand from that.
Well, thank you. Is there anything else out there open for comments or whatever?
I'm just curious, does EMAC differ from what the public safety and fire departments have on borderline states? Because a lot of the borderline states, the police and fire deploy across the border without any need to go through any, as far as I know, any federal agency. EMAC is more for emergency management stuff, correct?
It is. Now you can still have, especially if you have jurisdictions or cities that are right on, a state border. A lot of times they have their own mutual aid in place to be able to share those resources across the state line with each jurisdiction. EMAC, the benefits of that is it does cover some things that you may not typically find in other general mutual aid agreements that are in place, but it just makes it a little bit easier to move things across state lines. But there are still going to be those agreements with those smaller jurisdictions to be able to send resources.
Okay, great. Everything's good in chat.
All right. Well, thank you very much. This has been a great presentation. I'm sorry I showed up late, but I can watch the video afterwards, pick up the first part. When you're done with this presentation tonight, could you send me a copy of it so I can get it out there with the posting?
Yes, sir, I can.
All right. All right. Anything else out there, folks? Boy, I don't see anything, don't hear anything. I'm going to say 73s and see you all next week.